My brother stole my life's dream with the help of my wife. They used my own business plan to do it, then stood in a courtroom and called me unstable to justify their theft, leaving me with nothing but the tools in my old truck. So I used those tools to build an empire, and when they came crawling back broken and desperate, I didn't just turn them away. I arranged a special meeting to orchestrate their final public humiliation, ensuring they would never forget the day they chose to destroy me. This is not a story about forgiveness. This is the story of how I built my revenge from the ground up. The scent of cherry wood and tung oil filled my small workshop, a fragrance more comforting to me than any cologne. My hands, rough and calloused, moved with practiced certainty over the curved rail of a baby cradle I was finishing for a friend. Each pass of the sandpaper was a meditation. This was my sanctuary, the place where wood and will became one. Chloe's laughter echoed from the doorway as she came in, balancing 2 mugs of coffee. "Still at it, my love?" she asked, her smile warming the cool morning air. She set a mug on my workbench, her touch lingering on my arm. "You're gonna wear yourself out before we even get the keys to the new place." The new place was the Miller Workshop, the subject of our every conversation for the past 2 years. "It's not just a place, Chloe," I reminded her, my voice full of the reverence I felt. "It's a cathedral of wood. A legacy. We can have classes for neighborhood kids, a gallery for local artists. It's more than just a business." She leaned against me, inhaling the sawdust on my shirt. "I know. It's your masterpiece," she whispered, referring to the 60-page business plan I had poured my soul into. Our masterpiece. Our future. I believed her. She was the only person on earth I trusted with that dream, the keeper of my most vulnerable ambitions. I had no reason to think otherwise. Later that day, the polished mahogany of Mr. Gable's desk felt a world away from the familiar grain of my workbench. The air in his office was thick with the expensive smell of leather and success. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird eager for flight as he reached for the phone. "Just a final confirmation call to the bank, Ethan, and we can sign," he said, his smile as reassuring as the solid oak of his desk. He dialed, his voice a low, professional murmur. I watched the second hand on the wall clock tick, each movement a drumbeat marking the end of my old life and the beginning of my dream. Then I saw it, a subtle shift in Gable's posture. His smile faltered, his brow furrowed. "I see," he said into the receiver, his voice losing its easy confidence. "Is there a reason?" "It was pre-approved just yesterday." He listened, his face hardening, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the phone. The pen I was holding suddenly felt slick with sweat. He hung up, taking a moment to compose himself, avoiding my eyes. "Ethan," he began, his voice stripped of its earlier warmth, now flat and clinical. I'm incredibly sorry. The bank has rescinded the loan offer." The words were just sounds, nonsensical syllables. What? Why? It was a sure thing. We had the letter. "Another investor made a cash offer this morning, significantly above asking," Gable explained, looking genuinely baffled and angry on my behalf. "Apparently they presented a nearly identical business plan your plan, from what the loan officer described, but more aggressive, with a faster track approval. The bank's underwriters deemed it a more secure investment. The deal is closed. The workshop is sold." The room tilted. My masterpiece. My plan. The air was sucked from my lungs as if by a vacuum. "Another investor? Who?" I managed to choke out. Gable shook his head, his lips a thin, grim line. "Confidential. A real estate holdings company called Lionheart Properties." Lionheart. A shard of ice pierced through the fog of my confusion. My brother's company, my older brother, Liam, the golden boy. The shark in a tailored suit who had always looked at my calloused hands with a mixture of pity and contempt. It couldn't be. Not him. Not with Chloe. The drive home was a blur of rain-slicked asphalt and screeching tires. I didn't call him. I didn't call Chloe. I needed to see their faces. The rain hammered on the windshield of my old Ford F-150, the wipers fighting a losing battle, just like the hope in my chest. As I skidded to a stop in my driveway, my heart sank into a pit of ice. Parked in front of our modest suburban house was Liam's car, a gleaming black Mercedes, raindrops beating on its waxed surface like tiny jewels. It was a predator in my sanctuary. I slammed the truck door, the sound swallowed by the storm, and stalked toward the house. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside, dripping water onto the welcome mat Chloe had picked out, the one that said home is where the heart is. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. From my study, I heard it. Laughter. Not just any laughter. It was Chloe's light, musical laugh, a sound I had once loved, now intertwined with Liam's deep, confident chuckle. My blood ran cold. I crept down the hallway, my work boots silent on the hardwood floor. The study door was ajar. Peeking through the crack, I saw a scene that burned itself onto my soul for eternity. Liam stood behind Chloe, his hands on her shoulders in a gesture of casual intimacy, both of them leaning over my desk. And spread across the antique wood, where I'd spent countless nights refining my dream, was a set of architectural blueprints. They were for the Miller workshop. The structural engineer says, "We can knock out this wall for an open concept gallery," Liam was saying, his finger tracing a line on the paper. "Your idea for the skylights was brilliant, Chloe. Absolutely brilliant. Adds a touch of class Ethan would never have thought of." "I told you it would work," she replied, leaning her head back against his chest, a gesture of pure, comfortable familiarity. Ethan was always too cautious, too sentimental about the original structure. He saw a museum, we see a gold mine. On the corner of the desk, next to my favorite coffee mug, sat a leather-bound portfolio embossed with a golden lion's head. Liam's logo. My stolen plan, my soul, repackaged in a predator's skin. I didn't knock. I kicked the door open. It slammed against the wall with a crack that made them both jump, sending a stack of papers fluttering to the floor. Chloe spun around, her face a mask of shock, her hand flying to her mouth. Liam just straightened up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features before it was replaced by his signature, infuriating smirk. He wasn't caught. He was revealed. "Ethan, you're home early," he said, his tone perfectly calm, as if he'd just been caught borrowing a cup of sugar. "What is this?" My voice was a raw whisper, barely audible over the storm in my head. I pointed a trembling finger at the blueprints. "What have you done?" Chloe's face crumpled, a practiced mask of concern. "Ethan, honey, let us explain. It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like," I roared, the sound tearing from my throat, raw and ragged. "It looks like you took my life's work and handed it to him. It looks like my own wife and my own brother conspired to steal my dream from under me." Liam stepped forward, placing himself between me and Chloe, a self-appointed protector. "Don't be so dramatic, little brother," he said, with that condescending tone he'd used on me my entire life, the one that made me feel small and stupid. "I didn't steal it. I improved it. You had a nice little hobby plan. I turned it into a multi-million-dollar venture. You should be thanking me. We're keeping it in the family." "The family?" I laughed, a broken, hysterical sound that scared even me. "You aren't my family. You're vultures, picking over a corpse you killed yourselves." That weekend was a blur of frantic phone calls and a hastily convened family meeting at my parents' house. It was a kangaroo court, and I was the one on trial. I thought naively that if I laid out the facts, the timeline, the stolen plan, the lies, they would see the monstrous betrayal for what it was. I was a fool. We sat in their pristine living room, a sterile museum to Liam's achievements. His trophies and academic awards still lined the mantelpiece, gleaming under the track lighting, while my single high school woodworking prize was tucked away in an attic box. I explained everything, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and grief. When I finished, silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My mother was the first to speak, her gaze fixed on Liam, her favored son, not me. "Liam," she said, her voice soft with concern, not accusation. "Is this true?" "Parts of it," Liam admitted, reclining in the wingback armchair like a king on his throne. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Ethan had a good idea, but he lacks the killer instinct. The workshop would have failed in a year under his management. I stepped in to protect the investment, to protect him from himself. My father, a man who measured success in stock portfolios and square footage, nodded slowly, his expression one of serious consideration. "The boy has a point, Martha. Liam has a business mind. Ethan is a dreamer." He turned to me, his eyes filled not with sympathy, but with a familiar, weary disappointment. "Sometimes, son, you have to be practical. Liam is making this a real asset for all of us." They weren't just taking his side. They were rewriting reality. In their version, Liam was the hero, the pragmatic savior. I was the emotional, incompetent child who needed to be rescued from his own foolish dreams. It was in that moment that Chloe, seeing she had the full backing of the family, delivered the final, devastating blow. She spoke with a rehearsed sincerity that made my stomach churn, her voice trembling artfully. "I was so worried about him," she said, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "He was pouring all our savings into this. He wasn't sleeping. He was so obsessed." Liam's plan was a lifeline. She paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the line that sealed my fate. His business plan was perfect. Liam just had to put his name on it for the bank to finally say yes. There it was. The accidental confession, dressed up as a justification. His business plan was perfect. She hadn't just given him an idea. She had scanned and emailed him the finished, meticulously researched playbook. Every projection, every supplier contact, every marketing angle. She had given him the keys to my soul. The divorce proceedings were a public crucifixion. I walked into the courtroom hoping for a swift, clean break. I walked out a shell of a man. Liam and my parents testified against me. With the help of a high-priced lawyer, they painted me as an unstable, obsessive man, prone to fits of rage and financially irresponsible. They twisted my passion into a dangerous fixation. My late nights in the workshop weren't dedication. They were symptoms of a manic episode. My life savings weren't an investment. They were proof of reckless endangerment to the family's financial security. Chloe played the part of the terrified, long-suffering wife flawlessly. She cried on the stand, recounting fabricated stories of my mood swings and erratic behavior, twisting innocent arguments into terrifying threats. Liam sat behind her, a picture of supportive strength, occasionally nodding in solemn agreement. The judge, an old golfing buddy of my father's, looked at me with a mixture of pity and condescension. I lost everything. Because Chloe had sacrificed her career to support my volatile hobby, she was awarded the house. Because I was deemed emotionally unstable, I lost the majority of our savings. All I was left with was my truck, my personal tools, and a court order to stay 500 feet away from the Miller Workshop, now officially the flagship location for Liam & Company Designs. As I walked out of the courthouse, broke and broken, the sound of my family's cheerful chatter echoed behind me. They were already planning the grand opening. I hadn't just lost a building. I had lost my wife, my family, my reputation, and my future. They hadn't just stolen my dream. They had salted the earth where it once grew, ensuring nothing could ever flourish there again. 6 months passed in a gray, featureless haze. My world had shrunk to the 4 concrete walls of a drafty garage I rented on the industrial outskirts of town, a place that smelled of oil, damp concrete, and defeat. By day, I patched leaky roofs and fixed wobbly table legs for cash-small, soulless jobs that paid for instant noodles and the cheap whiskey I used to quiet my thoughts at night. A good day was one where I didn't think about them. There were no good days. The nights were the worst. On clear evenings, when the wind was just right, I could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of a table saw carrying across the city from the Miller Workshop. My workshop, Liam was using my tools, in my space, to build my dream. The sound was a ghost that haunted my waking hours, a constant reminder of my failure. I was a craftsman who had forgotten how to create, a man hollowed out by betrayal. The divorce had left me with a mountain of legal debt, and the depression was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until it was hard to breathe. My phone, once buzzing with calls from friends and clients, was now mostly silent, but the internet was a torture chamber I couldn't resist. In the dark of my garage, the glow of the screen would illuminate my face as I scrolled, my thumb hovering over images that felt like acid on an open wound. There was Liam, beaming in a local business journal, hailed as a real estate visionary. The article praised his bold acquisition and innovative business model. My business model. There was Chloe hosting a lavish charity gala in the workshop's main hall, the soaring timber beams I had planned to restore myself forming a halo above her head. She was quoted as saying how liberating it was to finally be part of a successful, forward-thinking enterprise. Old friends, people who had clapped me on the back and shared beers with me, now filled their comment sections with fawning praise. Incredible, Liam, you and Chloe are a power couple. They had chosen their side. I was a ghost in my own life story, watching from the outside as others lived in the world I was supposed to build. My own hands, once capable of creating beauty, now only seemed capable of scrolling through my own personal hell. I'd toss the phone onto the dusty concrete floor and stare at the ceiling, wondering if my family had been right all along. Maybe I was just a dreamer, incompetent and unstable, and this cold garage was exactly where I belonged. One rainy Tuesday, a name I hadn't seen in years flashed on my phone's screen. Mr. Chen. He was a notoriously difficult client from my past, a wealthy art collector with an eye for perfection and a reputation for breaking lesser craftsmen. He was demanding, abrasive, and paid extraordinarily well. I almost didn't answer, the effort of speaking to someone feeling monumental, but desperation won out. I swiped to answer, my voice a barely audible croak. Hello? Ethan, you are still alive, I take it. His voice was as sharp and clipped as ever. For now, Mr. Chen, he wasn't interested in pleasantries. I need a tea table, not just any tea table. I have a piece of wood. I need a master. Are you still a master or have you become a handyman? The question was a slap in the face, but it was an honest one. He described a complex design based on a Japanese joinery technique called kanawa tsugi, which requires near impossible precision to create a seamless interlocking joint without nails or glue. It was a challenge, a near suicidal undertaking for someone with my limited resources and shattered confidence. He wanted it done with a single piece of burl wood he'd had for 20 years. It was a test. He wasn't just commissioning a table, he was commissioning a resurrection. It was the first time in 6 months anyone had spoken to me like I was still a master of my craft. It was a tiny flicker of light in an endless tunnel. I'll do it, I said, my voice hoarse from disuse but a fraction stronger than before. The project required a specific type of reclaimed cypress to form the legs, a wood that could complement the burl without overpowering it and was notoriously hard to find. My search led me to a specialty lumber yard on the other side of town, one I hadn't visited since before the collapse. It was only a few blocks from the Miller workshop. I told myself it didn't matter, that I could handle it. But as I pulled up in my battered truck, the grand, sand-blasted sign of Liam and Company, designs visible in the distance, my heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I could see the new glass windows they'd installed, glinting in the weak afternoon sun. My windows? I tried to focus on the cypress, on the grain, on the work. As I was loading a heavy beam onto my truck, my muscles straining, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the lot. Liam. He stepped out, dressed in a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my rent for the year. He saw me, and a slow, pitying smile spread across his face. He walked over, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel with an arrogant deliberateness. Ethan? Still playing with wood, I see, he said, his eyes scanning my worn-out clothes and the dent in my truck's fender. He glanced toward the facade of his new headquarters down the street, puffing out his chest. Things are going great over there. Exploding, really. I tell you what, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper laced with contempt. I'm looking for someone to sweep the warehouse floors at night. It's a dirty job, but you look like you could use the cash. No hard feelings, right? I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, the full weight of his insult settling in my gut like a block of ice. He wanted to make me the janitor of my own stolen kingdom. He chuckled, patted me on the shoulder like a dog, and walked away. In that moment, the suffocating fog of depression began to burn away, replaced by something else. Something cold, hard, and sharp. It wasn't rage, it was focus. He had just handed me the one thing I'd been missing, a reason. He thought he was looking at a broken man. He was wrong. He was looking at a man with nothing left to lose. Back in the garage, I worked with a ferocity I hadn't felt in years. The tea table for Mr. Chen became my obsession. Every cut was precise to the millimeter, every angle was perfect. To perfect the Kanawatsugi joint, I needed to understand the limits of wood and weight distribution on a molecular level. I dug out a dusty box of old files from my college days, searching for my notes on structural engineering. Tucked inside, at the very bottom, was a folder I hadn't opened since the day my dream died. Miller Workshop Technicals. It contained copies of the original, century-old blueprints I had acquired for my restoration plan. My hands trembled as I unrolled them. I was looking for a specific detail about load-bearing beams, but my eyes were drawn to a different section. As I sifted through the brittle pages, my eyes caught something faint pencil notation on the schematics for the auxiliary warehouse, a section Liam was planning to convert into a high-end showroom. The note was scribbled in the elegant cursive of the original architect in 1922. Subsoil unstable. Monitor foundation hairline post-settlement. Below it, I saw a barely perceptible jagged line sketched onto the foundation plan. A hairline crack. A hidden critical flaw. I knew Liam. In his rush to gut and renovate, in his arrogant belief that he knew better than the old masters, he would have missed it. His contractors, eager for a quick payday from the visionary with deep pockets, would have plastered right over it. It wouldn't fail tomorrow, or even next month. But I knew that with the heavy rains our region got every winter, water would seep in. It would be a slow, silent cancer, rotting the foundation from within, a ticking time bomb of mold, decay, and catastrophic repair costs. I carefully folded the blueprint and slid it back into its folder. I didn't smile. I just felt a quiet click inside me, like a tumbler falling into place. It wasn't a plan yet, just a piece of knowledge. A secret. My secret. A month later, I delivered the tea table to Mr. Chen's penthouse apartment. He spent 10 minutes circling it, running his fingers over the seamless joint, his face an unreadable mask. He bent down, his eye level with the tabletop, inspecting my work with the intensity of a diamond cutter. Finally, he looked at me. This is not the work of a man, he said, his voice laced with awe. This is the work of a ghost. Perfect. He wrote me a check with an extra zero on the end and promised to tell his friends. Within a week, my phone began to ring. An architect wanting custom cabinetry for a tech CEO's mansion. A designer looking for a dozen handcrafted chairs for a boutique hotel. The calls kept coming. I stood in the middle of my cold garage, surrounded by sawdust and the ghosts of my past, holding a fistful of orders that could be the start of something new. For a moment, fear returned. The fear of risking it all again, of being a target, of trusting anyone. But then I remembered the smug, pitying look on Liam's face in the lumberyard. The choice was clear. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't just going to rebuild my life. I was going to build a fortress, piece by meticulous piece, right in his shadow. And this time, I would be the one holding the blueprints to his destruction. I would work in silence, let my success be my noise, and wait. Because I knew, with the certainty of a master craftsman who understands his materials, that a flawed foundation will always, eventually, crumble. 2 years felt like a lifetime. The cold, damp garage was a distant memory, replaced by a sprawling, state-of-the-art workshop I'd built from the ground up, tucked away in a discreet industrial park. The brand I'd created from nothing, Ethan's Craft, had become a hushed name whispered among the wealthy elite. My work was known for its obsessive attention to detail and a waiting list a year long. I didn't advertise, I didn't need to. Word of mouth was my marketing, and quality was my brand. My new workshop was the antithesis of my old garage, clean, modern, and flooded with natural light from the skylights I had once dreamed of installing in another building. The air hummed not with defeat, but with the quiet, powerful thrum of high-end machinery and the focused energy of the small, loyal team I'd assembled. I had a healthy bank account, the respect of my peers, and a peace I hadn't known was possible. I never spoke of my family, and they never tried to contact me. But news, like water, always finds a way to seep through the cracks. I heard the whispers through the grapevine. Small talk from suppliers who, with a knowing glance, served both me and Liam. Liam and Company Designs was hemorrhaging money. Projects were delayed, high-end clients were pulling out, and rumors of shoddy workmanship and persistent mold issues were beginning to circulate. The hairline crack I discovered in the old blueprints had done its silent, patient work. The ticking time bomb was beginning to chime. So when my phone buzzed with an unknown number 1 Tuesday afternoon, I wasn't entirely surprised. I almost ignored it, but a strange premonition, a sense of an ending, made me answer. The voice on the other end was strained, almost unrecognizable. It was my mother. "Ethan, it's Mom." Her tone was stripped of its usual matriarchal authority, replaced by a thin, desperate plea she tried to mask with forced cheerfulness. We were hoping you might come for dinner on Sunday. For a family reunion, it's been too long. I knew instantly it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about desperation. It was a summons, not an invitation. I accepted with a calm, even tone that seemed to unnerve her. "Of course, Mother, I'll be there." The silence on her end before she stammered a goodbye told me everything I needed to know. My quietness was a variable she hadn't planned for. Walking into my parents' house was like stepping back into a bad dream. The same mantelpiece, the same photos of a smiling, perfect family that never really existed, the same suffocating air of quiet judgment. Liam, Chloe, and my parents were all there, their smiles as brittle as old parchment. Liam looked tired, a decade older than his years, the confident swagger replaced by a tense, haunted energy. The expensive suit hung on him, rather than him wearing it. Chloe's face was pale, the designer dress she wore doing little to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She couldn't meet my gaze, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. They tried to make small talk, asking about my little business with a painful lack of awareness. I answered in short, polite, non-committal sentences. The tension was a fifth person at the table, a hungry ghost feeding on their anxiety and my silence. Finally, after a painfully awkward dinner that no one really ate, my father cleared his throat, setting down his fork with a clatter that sounded like a gavel. "Son," he said, directing his words to me for the first time that evening, "Liam has a proposal for you." Liam launched into a rehearsed speech, his voice slick with the false confidence of a cornered salesman. He called it a synergistic merger. He painted a picture of a unified family empire. He proposed that Ethan's Craft fold into Liam and Company Designs. I would oversee all production, the artistic side, as he put it, while he would handle the business and marketing. "Your brand has the prestige, and we have the infrastructure," he said, gesturing magnanimously, as if offering me a crown. "Together we can save the family legacy. We can save the workshop." He didn't ask, he told me. It wasn't a proposal, it was a demand wrapped in the language of a business deal. They weren't offering me a seat at the table. They were trying to chain me to their sinking ship. I listened patiently, my hands folded calmly on the table. I let him finish his entire ludicrous pitch. I let my mother chime in about the importance of family solidarity, and my father about making a sound financial decision. I gave them the stage, letting them expose the full depth of their arrogance and desperation. When they were finally done, an expectant silence fell over the room. They were waiting for me to argue, to get angry, to be the same emotional, predictable Ethan they had always known and dismissed. They expected me to be grateful for the chance to be welcomed back into the fold, to save them from themselves. I didn't answer them. Instead, I pulled out my phone and made a quiet call. "You can come in now," I said softly, then hung up. A moment later, the doorbell rang. Puzzled, my mother went to answer it. She returned, followed by a woman in a sharp, tailored suit, carrying a leather briefcase. The woman's presence immediately sucked the last bit of warmth from the room. Her gaze was professional, sharp, and missed nothing. "Everyone," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "This is Sarah Connell, my attorney. I thought it best she be present for any business discussions. She can offer some valuable legal perspective." The air turned to ice. My father's face went rigid. Liam's jaw tightened, and Chloe looked like she was about to be sick. The family reunion had just become a legal deposition. Sarah sat down, opened her briefcase, and with the cool precision of a surgeon, began to dissect Liam's proposal. She politely but ruthlessly exposed it for what it was, a hostile takeover attempt designed to plunder my brand's reputation and assets to cover his own catastrophic failures. She used their own business terms against them, speaking of liability, due diligence, and asset valuation with a fluency that made Liam's pitch sound like a child's lemonade stand proposal. Then she paused, looked directly at Liam, and said, "Furthermore, regarding the workshop's infrastructure, my client's preliminary research suggests there may be significant, undisclosed structural issues with the warehouse foundation, potentially costing upwards of 7 figures to remediate. Any merger, of course, would make my client equally liable for that pre-existing negligence. A rather unwise investment, wouldn't you agree?" Liam's face turned ashen. He knew he was trapped. He opened his mouth to protest, a pathetic "that's not true" forming on his lips, but the words died in his throat. He had been so sure of my ignorance, so certain of his own superiority. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. With Sarah having laid the groundwork, I finally stood up. It was my turn. My voice was quiet, devoid of anger, but heavy with the finality of a judge's sentence. "I'm not interested in your merger," I said, "and I'm not interested in your workshop. You can have it." I walked over to the large bay window that overlooked the backyard. I drew back the curtains. I've been a little busy with my own projects. They all turned to look. In the distance, just beyond the edge of my parents' manicured lawn, another property was visible. A property they had always dismissed as a useless, overgrown plot of land. But it wasn't empty anymore. Rising from the ground was a magnificent structure of glass, steel, and reclaimed timber glowing under a battery of construction lights. It was twice the size of the old Miller workshop, a modern masterpiece of architectural design. And mounted on the front, visible even from this distance, was a massive, elegantly carved sign, "Ethan's Craft Workshop and Gallery." I turned back to face them. Their faces were a gallery of shock and disbelief. My father's mouth hung open. My mother's hand was at her throat. Chloe was openly weeping, not for me, but for the glittering future she had just seen vanish. I looked directly at Liam, at the man who had taken everything and delivered the final line of my performance. "You stole my dream," I said, my voice steady and clear. "So I built a better one. Right next door. So that every single morning, when you wake up and look out the window of your crumbling monument to betrayal, you will be reminded of the price you paid for it." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out the door, Sarah following silently behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound of their stunned silence was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. It was the sound of a debt being paid in full. It wasn't the wild joy of victory. It was something deeper, quieter. It was the sound of justice, finally and perfectly served cold.